Hi, I'm Zoe, and I chose The Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 1 as my graphic novel to analyze. The Legend of Korra Turf Wars Part 1 was released July 26th, 2017. The writer was Michael Dante DiMartino. The artist was Irene Coe. The letterer was Nate Picos. The colorist was Vivian Ng. And the editor was Dave Marshall. Dark Horse Comics was the publisher, and this is a 79-page graphic novel through and through. This comic really fits the model that we were taught in this class actually quite well. Act 1 was roughly page 1 through page 19. Act 2 was page 20 through 62, and Act 3 was page 63 through page 79. Now, I can basically round that to 20, 40, and 20 to make roughly 80 pages. And that was the model was almost perfect out to the first and the final acts being almost even, and then having the really long or longer middle act, Act 2. This graphic novel actually has multiple goals, multiple plot lines that are kind of all interwoven with each other. Um, Predominantly, the first and foremost plot line, the A plot, if you will, mostly has to do with the spirit world and then the overworld, if you will. Um, and that mostly has to do with keeping the peace between both of them. The second plot line mostly just falls into campaigning for president of a city and the refugees that are having issues with the presidency and with the world powers there. The third is the turf war that's going on between different gangs and all these different rival companies and things like that. And then the fourth and final plot line is of the relationship between the two main characters, Korra and Asami. Um, so there's a lot going on in this graphic novel, and it's all blended together relatively nicely. This story predominantly belongs to Korra, who is the avatar. She's pretty much the center of everything, but it does branch off into a lot of the background characters, a lot of the secondary characters, but it is predominantly hers, and she does run with and resolve pretty much every single plot line, every single plot issue that there is. She is directly involved with it. Now, of all of the plot lines, the ultimate goal of Act 2 is furthering pretty much every single one of those. As I mentioned, they are very interwoven with each other, and so they all kind of move forward slowly, but at the same time. The peace between the overworld and the spirit world it's a constant battle. They're always trying to get things done. They're always trying to keep the peace. They're trying to keep the military out of it, and they're working on it almost constantly. The campaign and the refugees are also very important, and they're kind of always being dealt with, whether it's directly by Avatar Korra or by one of her associates. The turf wars are something that's a little more background, but also bleeding into just every other plot line that is there, every other possible option that you have. It bleeds into all of those. And so that's also something that's kind of further progressing. No matter what happens, it has to progress with the rest of the story. And then lastly is the relationship between the Avatar and her significant other, which is something that also it progresses a lot slower than the rest of the story. However, it is very prevalent and predominant when things slow down. When the action slows down, it gets kind of into its full effect. So this story is a true, full, solid story as a full arc. There is a definite beginning, which takes place right at the end of the TV show, where they are in the spirit world for a quick 3-day vacation, and then they come back, and then there's the immediate call to action when the city starts to fall apart, military wants to move in, companies want to move in, turf wars start happening, everything just breaks out and goes absolutely insane. There is a true middle where everything starts to kind of get a little too crazy. The relationship between our two main protagonists gets a little strained. The turf wars starts to blow up even bigger to where it is a problem with the campaign and with the refugees. Along with that as well, the spirit world spirits are very upset with the overworld, and would like to also start a war. So everyone's just kind of starting a war, and it gets to a point where it's almost too dangerous for anyone to really be there at all, except for the Avatar trying to keep the peace. And it also has a true ending that, to me, was very satisfactory. Of course, there are two other parts to the story, but with the way that this ended, it was still very satisfactory. In the peace was everything simmered down just enough to where it felt like, okay, peace is achievable. The relationship between the two main characters, it settled a lot, and they were in a more accepting place of it, and coming out to friends and whatnot, and everyone was very accepting of it. Um, the presidency and the campaign and the refugees were a little less a little less chill about it. They were still, tensions were high, but they still managed to find a common ground to calm everyone down, to get housing, to get funding, and to make the campaigning president look good. A really solid kind of just plateau for it all. Things were at the moment very at peace. The turf war had simmered down to maybe just a few street fights here and there, but everything had calmed down significantly from where it had started. Avatar Korra does have a small arc of her own in the sense that she's typically very hot headed, and punch first, ask questions later is kind of her motto. And something that kind of comes through this arc, especially regarding her newfound relationship with a woman and not a man, is that at first she tends to get a little fiery with anyone who kind of opposes her sexuality, or sees it as some sort of problem, and she gets really hot headed, as she typically kind of always does. But her significant other manages to actually calm her down and help her see the other side of things, and of why people might not be as accepting, or why, she shouldn't blow up on her parents for trying to protect her over it. The other main character arc is of the main villain, and he goes by the name of Takuga, I believe. And he starts out as being basically employed by one of the major companies in the city. He basically, his job is just to go around and scare people and claim turf, as is turf wars. And he goes from being basically a pawn, or I should more like a knight in this crazy game of chess that these companies have going around, these rival companies have. He goes from that to being the king himself. He takes over pretty much by the end of the comic. He goes from just kind of being a lackey and kind of just being the head of his branch to actually running the entire operation. Whether it's just a little, scene tag up in a box somewhere, or if the characters themselves are saying where they're going. We have pages where, they'll be talking as they're traveling to their next destination, which is great. Or you can see their destination in their background as they're traveling to it. Sometimes we have amazing full page spreads of them traveling. So there's these really, really great transitions between that, and you're never really lost ever, which is very, very much appreciated. The Legend of Korra was really, really moment to moment and action to action predominantly. There were, of course, moments where someone would turn, or, there would be a conversation between two people that would happen. There was just very, very moment to moment. You would see someone do one thing, and then you'd see them turn or do whatever. Action to action mostly happened in the fight scenes. There's a lot of action, despite this being more plot driven and less intense and crazy than what I'm used to with the series. A nice chunk of aspect to aspect in the beginning. In Act 1, when Korra and Asami are in the spirit world, it's a 3-day vacation, but it's maybe a page or two of kind of what's going on, and we just get these little snippets of kind of what they're doing in the spirit world over these 3 days. So I would say that it's kind of utilizing that idea of using, a page as a mini comic. So I could kind of see how that is, but I don't know if I could say that it's really a true page as a mini comic type style. The action almost kind of like just held your hand right to it, or just kind of just delivered you right to it. There are times where certain characters would be facing the way of the new dialogue, or they would be, there was literal like action, like somebody swinging or somebody bending an element towards a certain area, and that's where your eyes would go, and you're like, oh, there's a text box there. And so that directional flow, it was literally a directional flow many times, and I really, really appreciated that, and I enjoyed that. I would recommend this to my classmates should they know what the background story of this novel is from. Again, it was from a TV show. Many of my friends do know this series and did follow this series, and so they know all of the background information. However, there are two women that are canon bisexual and that are in a relationship with each other. And I love that representation, and their dynamic is phenomenal. I think it's great. However, we are living in a time where it's not something that everyone is okay with or respects. And I think that a lot of it just comes down to personal preference. So I would not recommend this to my friends, mostly due to the fact that this does go against a lot of their beliefs. An A, B, C, D plot going on here. And I myself have kind of noticed that sometimes that's a little too much. I think I would cut down on, I would have two plot lines, more than likely just two plot lines, three maybe at the most, but also be sure to kind of like work those kind of like in a level of, this is the most important, this is the most intense one, this is the one that we're going to be showcasing the most, and then actually, go down the line and make each problem or each issue a little bit smaller, a little less camera time. In most countries where this TV show is being broadcasted, homosexual relationships, or really just any relationship that's not between a man and a woman, not only is it very, very frowned upon, but it's also outlawed. So many TV shows can't actually be shown there, and a relationship between two female characters, even in a cartoon, is not allowed. And so, in an effort to not be pulled from the station and not to be pulled from different countries, the showrunners actually left this relationship relatively underdeveloped until the series finale, until the first part of the graphic novel. So it felt like it came out of nowhere, but it actually was planned the entire time, and that was something that I just thought was really interesting. Ultimately, I was really, really happy to be able to read this and to be able to analyze it. And ultimately, I think it really helped seal in the understanding of this course, and of what we learned. I actually saw a lot of the things that we had learned and the things that we had been observing all throughout this course actually be right in front of me, and actually see these images and see these techniques and these styles used. And I thought that it was amazing, and I was really, really happy to see that this is something that you're going to use. um, yeah, and I thought it was really cool. So thank you for listening to me analyze The Legend of Korra.